Hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. And we are going to be doing an imagination and creativity based art exercise today to kind of hopefully get out of my head for a minute and kind of explore some of the important components of letting loose kind of mentally when you're doing some sort of design, right? So if you decide to draw alongside me throughout this video, get creative, do something like that, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. I always love to hear it and know what you guys get up to whilst drawing alongside me. Additionally, if you have the time to watch this video all the way through, I would love to stay and chat with you for the next hour and a half-ish that this video will be. And I look forward to seeing you at the end of the video. So, Editing Rain here, just wanting to briefly state that the fan sound will go away within the first 6 or so minutes of the video, so I promise the audio will improve. There's a kind of a large portion to learning to be an artist and kind of honing your craft that's dedicated towards trying to better your ability to identify shapes and kind of breaking things down to their absolute simplest forms. And so I find that a lot of the time when there are some form of art exercise or art challenge, there's a component to them that is focused on being able to identify shapes, draw things based on their shapes, or kind of splotching down something onto the paper and creating something from it. You see this with like challenges based around spilling beverages on papers, things like that, splattering something, or having like your younger or less creatively or artistically inclined family member or friend kind of scribble and then trying to identify something from the scribbles. So those are all examples of this kind of creative exercise where you're trying to not think about the shapes when you initially create them and then using your imagination to extrapolate something better, broader, or more defined from those basic shadows. And so I am not interested in spilling coffee all over my desk, and I think that I kind of lack quite the level of imaginative development to quite go to spilling beverages right now. So I instead took the broad end of a blue-gray Ohuhu chisel tip marker and, well, it's a brush tip, but I took the broad chisel tip end, and I splotched down random shapes, relying on the chunkiness of that broad end to force myself to not be able to create defined lines and defined shapes or things that would be super easily identifiable as something that I'm good at or familiar with or capable of readily identifying. I especially am focusing on making broad, blocky shapes, and that's because I am a character-focused artist first and foremost with all of my work. So I'm intentionally trying to stay away from things that feel very organic, very kind of unnatural, and kind of more human-shaped, animal-shaped, outright. And that's because that's generally where I lean, and as an imagination exercise and a creative pursuit, I'm supposed to be intentionally challenging myself to think about something that is beyond my go-to and readily approached kind of topics, right? So I was trying to, well, I don't think it's possible to completely turn your brain off and not think when you're like doing something like this. So I was repeatedly telling myself that I am thinking about landscapes, city skylines type things, so that I wouldn't kind of automatically lean into what I'm already more naturally inclined towards and not realize it, right? I've turned off my space heater now, so hopefully any weird feedback you were hearing in the background will be over soon when it kind of dies off. I'm really sorry about that. I forgot that I have to freeze to do voiceovers. So, back to what I was saying though, I was trying to think of things that I am very bad at, right? Landscapes and city skylines, cities, environments really is what I'm bad at, right? And so my objective with that was that surely if I'm thinking about these things and I'm trying to kind of, by forcing myself to envision those kind of basic shapes that you associate with those sorts of environments, I am now no longer putting myself in a position where I can almost accidentally create something that leans more towards my general artistic practice, which was a big component of the goal, right? I'm pushing my creativity and I'm pushing my imagination, right? And so I think I got a pretty good swath of shapes that are pretty out of the scope of anything that I could initially identify or think about or would readily kind of envision as an animal. And like in retrospect, there was one shape I realized I could have made a cute little cat, but other than that, most of the things I wasn't picturing animals when I looked at them. If I stared long enough, I probably could have turned them into one, but I want to kind of save leaning into animals for after I've practiced drawing them more outright, basically, because I'm not actually really good at drawing animals, but I'm good at organic shapes, and I lean towards those kind of scopes artistically, right? So, objectively, I was kind of trying to avoid those sorts of things and think more mechanical or environmental. And I ultimately think that the mechanical approach is what ultimately ended up being a little bit more natural when looking at these shapes, which I'm not entirely sure where that comes from inherently. I've never been a huge fan of steampunk, but I found that I was really enticed towards thinking about robots, random shapes, kind of metal armaments, something that probably would never actually exist in the real world, but if you saw it while playing some sort of fantasy game, you wouldn't look at it fantasy, science fiction, dystopian sort of game. I guess there's fantasy games with weird metal creatures, but you wouldn't think twice and be like, that would never exist in the real world. That makes literally zero sense. And so I don't know how well I did with that because I'm not super in that sphere, but that's kind of where I felt most naturally inclined. And I think ultimately it worked out okay. So, imagination wise, I think that this was a really good first step to breaking out of my comfort zone. And there goes my cats, if you heard them. They are excited. But it was a generally very, very valuable beginner experience. But let's talk about the overall kind of value to approaching creativity and thinking about art in this sort of way and breaking out of your kind of more habitual mindset as an artist for a minute. Firstly, there is no requirement to pursue expanding your artistic scope. There's no requirement to be an artist that you need to draw things that you don't feel particularly inclined to, that you need to go out of your way to draw things that don't inspire you. And frankly, I would encourage people to generally avoid drawing things that stifle creativity and stifle the desire to draw. Equally so, if you're capable of having even the slightest inclination of interest in something other than your go-to art, your go-to style, by forcing yourself, or maybe not even forcing yourself, but by taking the time to explore something that is beyond what comes naturally to you, you push yourself out of the boundaries of where you're currently sitting artistically, and you're kind of being made to think about things in a different scope, a different capacity. You're going out of your way to creatively think and problem solve a whole different sphere of art. And when it comes to depending on where you're pursuing artistically, like objectively as your goal, what do you want to do with art? If you're pursuing art for a professional purpose, it broadens your appeal as an artist. One, to have multiple art styles that you're capable of drawing in. It gives you a more diverse kind of audience that is willing to possibly hire you or purchase your work. So, in a professional environment, that's kind of what it's valuable for. But in just a personal level, as somebody who creates and kind of perhaps wants to be a professional but not necessarily hired to work kind of big, intense jobs that are maybe in the animation industry where everyone needs to have the same art style and draw the same way for the fluidity and the consistency of the show. When you're working on a more interpersonal level, a small business sort of level, by expanding your kind of scope and perception of art and creativity and forcing yourself to use your imagination in ways that are perhaps beyond what you're already doing, you're opening yourself up to a different environment for your art to kind of flow through. You're opening up kind of this whole additional universe and kind of niche that you're able to create within if you find it interesting, or different styles, or perhaps you find that there's some mediums that you work in more efficiently so you could produce more work in it, or perhaps some are just a little bit more enjoyable for certain reasons. You can go through artistic phases, which is something that highly benefits me from avoiding burnout, because by having an artistic phase and kind of an artistic cycle that I go through yearly, it prevents me from feeling stuck in the same place, because I'm able to cycle through different things and keep my creative practice more diverse for me. And that's not going to work for people who aren't mixed media artists, probably, but I am one, and I think a good enough portion of my audience probably works with more than one medium, and maybe even simultaneously. But for me, having this kind of distinction, the separation between different styles that I utilize, between different mediums, my traditional versus digital art looks very different from each other. I'm able to avoid the feeling or the sensation that perhaps I'm not doing enough, or that perhaps I'm doing the same thing for too long. I'm not being made to experience the same day in, day out kind of process artistically. And that's something that's very important for my kind of mental health and mental well being as an artist. By being able to, if I want to step away from traditional art to do digital art, whilst I kind of get over having done the same thing traditionally for a while, I can do that. And I'm still creating, but I'm creating differently. And that's something that I found is personally very beneficial for my mental health. And my ink versus my kind of colored work is very different. Marker versus paint pen is drastically different. I've recently done a clay project before, or now, and these are all kind of different things where if I'm starting to feel a dull or a drab point artistically, I can just say, I'm going to stop doing this for a while and pick up a different medium. And I'm somebody who kind of operates on whims when it comes to my art. I don't have somebody that I answer to artistically. I don't have a boss who tells me what to draw. And so if I sit down one day and I'm feeling inclined towards a certain medium, that's the medium of the day. And it keeps a freshness, a variety to things. Think of it kind of similarly to people who like to have a variety of foods. They don't eat the same thing every day. They don't really have much of a routine. There's nothing wrong with people who have a routine, who like to eat things that just are the same every day. You know, people like my own grandmother. She eats the same thing every morning except maybe on a holiday. It's the same old cinnamon toast with her coffee with way too much creamer, personally, in my opinion. Don't come at me, Grandma, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, she likes it, but for some people, they want to have a diversity in their breakfast. And that's kind of something that I found in my art is just something that I need. I can't do the same thing every day, day in, day out, without burnout or needing to take long steps away from my artistic practice. Kind of the same way some people can do really large scale, hyper realistic art that takes literal years sometimes to complete a piece. For people who could spend months upon months on the exact same drawing. I'm just not that kind of artist, and so practices like this that force me to kind of exit my general standard and explore something that's just very different helps keep my creative environment very fresh and fluid, and it helps me avoid feeling like I'm doing too much of the same thing. Another aspect of this that's just highly desirable for me is it creates a quick satisfaction, like a quick little dopamine hit, because this is something that it took me a long time to do. It took me an hour and a half, but for having an entire full sheet that's 9 by 12 of little doodles that I all really like, that's very satisfying, and it takes a lot less time than if I were to have done a 9 by 12 fully rendered illustration of a character. Especially because I don't really work on 9 by 12 because of my kind of chronic health conditions. It makes working big difficult, but breaking it down into these smaller components, I'm able to create something big that makes it feel immediately like a larger accomplishment than a lot of the other stuff that I do on my day-to-day kind of art journey. My sketchbook is like a 5 by 8, and then I work on 8 by 10 for my bigger illustrations. That's about as big as I can get without it really taking too much time based on having to take too many breaks for health reasons, right? And so it also creates a diversity in the kind of appearance of the work I've created. It's a different sized paper, and it creates a satisfying feeling for me to have this thing that's different from everything else in my portfolio or my like set of art. And I've been finding that I just really like looking at this finished sheet. And I didn't even finish it that long ago, but I like looking at it. There are a lot of times when I finish an illustration where I don't feel compelled to look at it again for a long while because I just finished it and it's the same old that I always do. So this has been a very satisfying experience for me that I've immensely enjoyed, but I also found that it's highly valuable for me maybe to start thinking about exploring things artistically that are really outside of my scope. I don't intend to become sort of this like biomechanical artist or do like sci-fi illustrations. Sci-fi isn't even a genre that I am personally fond of, but I think that there's definitely something to be said about perhaps creating fun, weird, strange environments for my characters to be in, not based on anything real, but based on little thumbnails almost like these. And while I focused on a more mechanical component with this because it's completely out of my sphere, it's something that I have zero experience in. I think I tried to draw a car once. It was for a like school day bus drawing competition that my school made us do every year, and it was ugly, okay? I literally wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot full, 10-foot full, huh? A 10-foot pole if I found it, and I don't think we have it still, but I can't draw cars or anything, So I was kind of focusing more in that realm whilst working. However, I think that there's a lot of fun potential in the shapes that I did make towards doing a more floating island type thing. Think Castle in the Sky from Ghibli Studios. Stuff like that that's really, really desirable and beautiful and has this kind of whimsy that does fit more into what I'm naturally inclined towards artistically. And so I'm definitely really excited for the potential that this has for future artistic projects where I might be able to create completely new designs for environments to put my characters in based on a thumbnailing process like this. And additionally, I'm seeing a value to this in perhaps creating thumbnails for my already existing universes, but that's a bit more of a personal reason why I think that this is very valuable for artists to consider trying. But ultimately, the SparkNotes kind of summary of what I'm trying to say is that by broadening your creative perspective through exercises like this, where you can't fall into the same trap that, I don't want to say same trap, but to the same habits that you always engage in, it allows you to explore a wider range of kind of experiences and perspectives artistically, but also a wider range of skill sets, right? So by forcing myself to sit down, I keep saying forcing myself. I did this completely willingly and I had a good time while doing it, and I didn't at any point want to quit. So I'm not forcing myself. I enjoyed the process, but by sitting down and doing something that's so out of the scope for me, I found that I'm very much valuing the kind of alteration in my perception of line weights and their importance for distinguishing between kind of foreground and background kind of environments, based on the fact that this isn't something that naturally exists. And so now I have to really think about how I want to present it to people, because while I can stylize it, yes, and it works great, I need to think a little bit harder about how I want it to read to other people, because people know what humans look like, and you see humans every day, and that can be just yourself, right? Unless you're have poor eyesight, but that's kind of irrelevant to the topic of conversation. So, but like for people who are consuming media visually and seeing it, they see humans every day. You're a human, you see yourself, you encounter your reflection, right? And so I don't have to rely on as much realism to convey my point, because I know that so long as I have things in the general right location, it's going to communicate that it's a human to somebody. And that's how you get such wild, fun, stylistic changes and alterations to humans and human anatomy and things like that, because we know what they look like, so we can really extrapolate it and alter these things, and it'll still read as a person based on facial feature placement. And generally, as you move those facial features, and you kind of alter those things or add things that we don't standard think of as human features, that's when you bleed into monsters, and then you get humanoid monsters, and those little things are still enough for you to kind of identify that it's something human-ish and human in nature. And so when you kind of go out of your way to do something that's super out of your sphere, that isn't like what I'm used to for humans like this, I now have to force myself to think about how I want it to read. And so you can see later in the video, as I start to try and include pipes, and I break beyond the boundaries to create something more readable, and I use the basic initial shape as the guideline, and then I add basically accessories, as I would call them. You can see that I'm having a hard time figuring out how to convey pipes versus something completely different like a handle. And I don't really know how to articulate that stuff because it's completely out of my scope. And so I've now been presented with a creative challenge that I can start to think about kind of figuring out through these exercises and workshopping in a very quick and efficient manner the best way to try and conquer this issue. So generally my Spark Notes ended up being really long, so this is Spark Notes 2.0 because I'm a yapper. I just find that breaking beyond what I'm used to is very valuable for me, and I believe for many other artists, not all artists, it can pose a great opportunity to expand creative thinking and expand your imagination in a way that'll benefit your normal art. When it comes to working with the imagination, I have my own kind of ulterior motives, or that makes it sound like suspicious and criminal. I have my own kind of personal objectives for wanting to work hard to kind of expand my creativity and my ability to work from the imagination, really. And so while I think it's beneficial for most artists to pursue something like this, I have a very solid reason why for my artistic practices, want to work harder to kind of expand the way that I think and go out of my way to push my creative understanding and my ability to just draw from my own imagination. And a lot of that is based in my disability-themed plant zombies. I want to be able to more naturally and readily have different designs just come to me. I want to not have to think about the character design when creating these creatures as much as I do. I want to get to a point where I can envision something and it comes out at least good enough that I can then use that as a thumbnail to further start expanding a concept, right? I want to get to a point artistically where when I see something in my head and there's something like in my brain that I'm imagining, I can put it on paper more effectively. And I think that starts with not forcing yourself, I think that starts with putting yourself in a position where you have to try and think more creatively and have that just kind of be the objective, to think beyond what you already know and then execute it. I think that if I continue to just work the way that I work personally, that I'm never going to actually see real solid improvement that gets me to the place that I want to be. Because while I very much love my drawing process as it is, and I very much enjoy the process of finding references and things like that, it's because I spend so much time thinking in that moment, what am I going to do? What are my deliberate desires? That I'm never going to be able to create full illustrations that I truly just feel like capture my initial essence. And that's something that I feel I've lost, to be very specific. I feel that I have lost my ability to let myself draw naturally and do what comes to me. And it's something that I'm trying to relearn how to do. So it's a personal issue that I've encountered and something I used to be really good at. All of my best work was work that came from me not thinking. It's the work that came from me putting pen to paper and just letting it happen. And I haven't been able to do that in the last few months. And I've been in kind of an artistic rut where even when I feel inspired and I don't have art block, I feel like art isn't coming out of my hand naturally, right? And so now I'm in the kind of like art therapy process of reteaching myself how to just let things flow, shut off my brain and draw, and then actually commit to it. I talk in my videos all the time about how when I'm actually working and I have like everything kind of said and done in terms of a sketch, I turn off my brain and all of the future decisions just don't happen, right? I stop deciding once I get to the coloring phase, and I'm able to just kind of line the work, and I'm no longer, as soon as I'm done sketching, my brain can shut off again because I have like a creative flow that really works for me when it comes to coloring, and I don't need to think about it. It's not something that I feel I need to do, and I'm able to kind of enter my creative zone. But I haven't been having that in like sketching and composition recently, and that's something that has been really a challenge for me to kind of figure out how did I learn to do this in the first place, and then how did I lose it? At what point did just kind of drawing stop coming so innate to who I am? And like, when did my character designs kind of start falling apart in terms of my ability to just kind of do it, right? And I think it happened somewhere in my 9th sketchbook. I was talking to a professor about it earlier, that I feel like everything felt right in my 9th sketchbook, and somewhere along the way, I kind of didn't start thinking with my kind of imagination and creating just out of my brain as much as I was before. And I kind of want to blame college for that, which is kind of weird, but by taking art classes in my undergrad, and I must say, I am an advocate for getting a college degree if it suits what you want to do with your life, right? My college degree is important for me wanting to be an art teacher. However, it's kind of weird. When you're self-taught and then you go to college, you almost are forced to learn how to stop being an artist for a minute there. And that's what I was. I was a self-taught artist who was doing character design, and then I started to take college courses because I thought they'd be fun and they'd be good for my GPA because I was a science major. I was a science major. I got my degree in science, one of them. And so I wanted something that would kind of cushion my GPA, and art is something that I really loved. And I took a lot of upper division courses where I had full creative freedom. Well, not full creative freedom. I had a prompt that I needed to adhere to, but there was a lot of creative liberties, and so it was more so like Inktober or Drawtober. You know, you have a prompt, but you can really go as far as you want to go with it as long as you can justify how you made the decisions you made or explain how you got to this kind of idea. You're probably good to go. My comics class was the first class I ever took in college that was art. Well, except for my bad experience in high school, I took at a community college, but I almost don't even remember. It was such a bad experience. But as like an adult college, well, I was 17, but that's irrelevant. As a college student who was a full-time, full 4-year bound college student, I took comics, and there was just a load of creative liberties in it. And I think I might have talked about my old college art on my channel at some point, but effectively how it worked was that I ultimately got to this point where I was essentially just drawing a 3-strip comic, then doing a narrative, and then doing an introductory comic on like introduce you to somebody. So my first ever comic for introducing yourself to somebody, it was about my cat. I was introducing somebody to my cat, right? My second one, also about my cat, basically. So it's easy to kind of take liberties with that, right? If introduce me to somebody through a comic could be an original character, it could be a historical person. You can really go a lot of places with something like that. It's when you get to those beginner classes that I had skipped in the beginning. Basically, what happened? Let me articulate myself in a linear way. In my 3rd year, my health got really bad, and I was worried I wasn't going to be able to finish my botany degree. So I decided to add my art degree so that I would graduate with a college degree still. My college education wouldn't have been for nothing because I was able to finish my art degree online. The science one, maybe not. I did manage to do it. I had to take classes at 2 or 3 different colleges and transfer them over to be able to do it, but I did it, right? For the art degree, I was able to do it online. I compromised a couple of courses so I didn't have to take ceramics like you would have otherwise had to, and I took photography instead. So there were some compromises that came of it, but I was able to do it, right? And so with that, I kind of found myself in the position where I had to take all of the beginner classes again, photography being one of them, in place of ceramics, which is like the 4th art class you have to take. And in having to do that, I like lost my ability to an extent to kind of creatively work and just do what felt right to me. And if I go to sketchbook 9, I can kind of pinpoint the exact point where I took the class that ended up having a massive negative impact on my overall artistic experience, and it was just your introductory drawing class. And it was because I don't want to say advanced in any capacity, but I was at a point artistically where I was capable of creative thinking because I'd been drawing so long. And so now that I was in a position where I had to basically relearn to draw as if I didn't have these kind of creative understandings already innate to me, I found myself not knowing how to think like I didn't have a creative kind of outlook, because these are not classes that are meant for art students exclusively, right? It's the introductory classes to get a degree, but they're general education. They're for people who are maybe going to go into a nursing degree, right? And they're not people who need to learn to think creatively per se, to an extent that they're going to be creating these wonderful illustrations one day. The type of creative thinking that they need to do falls more in a like solution management sort of system, right? Or kind of maybe probably more of a critical thinking over a creative thinking. They're not trying to like think about how they're going to approach a composition for a landscape piece in their career, right? It's is curated for a broader audience of people, and that's great. I think that having art in your general education is important because if you don't encourage people to creatively think, that you kind of deny people the ability to learn creative problem solving quite as much and thinking outside of the box to find solutions. I think creative and critical thinking go hand in hand for me, and I really value people being encouraged to explore both, even if it's just a teeny bit, just to get some level of baseline understanding that helps them to kind of understand things. It also helps people be more aware of when they're being advertised to in kind of a toxic, maybe not so great way. When you learn to identify basic artistic principles, you kind of can learn when somebody's trying to manipulate you into purchasing something a little bit better, but that's a whole different topic of conversation. But I can kind of pinpoint the downfall in my just kind of natural, intrinsic creative process to when I took that class. And I think it was how I had to approach my art in that class and having really strict guidelines to what I could do. I wasn't even allowed to draw for the first 7 weeks of class. I was only allowed to do collages, and it just put a huge damper on my art because I was doing collages for weeks. And so it's in that I feel like I almost kind of like lost my ability to just kind of let my art happen, which is really weird. You'd think I'd have a better backbone than that, but I apparently don't. And so I'm trying to kind of unthink those processes. And I'm optimistic that there's a kind of brighter future for me if I force myself to undo the kind of way that I started thinking in that class to get through artistically, which is weird. And let me further explain it. When you have this long checklist of criteria that you need to hit, and they don't all creatively work as a unit together per se, you start to think of art as an objective hitting process rather than trying to actually create something unified that feels meaningful or powerful, right? So when you're learning basic beginner art principles like perspective or like foreground, middle ground, background and stuff like that, you're hitting checkpoints of having these components with perhaps a certain color palette or doing it in this very particular way. We had to create an environment scene with a foreground, middle ground, background from a very specific brand of magazine, which felt completely unnecessary. I think it was like my college's magazine that we had to do it based on. This is all effectively a long-winded way of saying that for some reason, when I had to do more structured art classes in my undergrad, I found that I was kind of regressing as an artist because I was somewhere else in my art journey than I was supposed to be when taking the class. So I feel like those courses are obviously very beneficial for people who don't have a lot of experience in art, but when you've been self-taught for several years, like I was at the time, I just felt like it put me in a position where I wasn't really getting what I needed, and I was almost being held back from further developing. And maybe if I hadn't gone out of my way to try and learn a quote-unquote proper way by kind of learning the fundamentals before moving on to other stages in my art journey, it wouldn't have felt that way. But I had really put a lot of care into trying to learn art the proper way, but from home essentially. And I just feel like I haven't gotten out of that because I had to take so many of these art courses back to back. And now I'm really not even a year out of my undergrad education. I'm halfway through my first full semester in my Master's of Fine Arts where I have free reign to create as I desire. There are no limitations to my creation anymore. And I think that it's time for me to start going through the process of breaking out of this weird mindset that I ended up in over the course of my art education for some reason. It has been kind of just a process, and I feel like this is a good first step. I know I was talking in my video last week about how I'm going to start working on some more free drawing to kind of embrace creativity and imagination further in my artistic practice and really push myself along and get to where I want to be as an artist again, and kind of realign with having my mind and artistic practice really kind of just align how I've always really wanted them to. And I don't think that all artists need to go on some sort of self-discovery journey like I'm kind of doing right now with my art, but I have so much passion for my plant zombie characters and my original characters, and this weird artistic slump where I feel I talked about being in an art block recently, and I'm not in that anymore, but I feel like I'm still not able to draw, but I want to, and I'm really excited to. And so just feels like the necessary step, especially at the start of my MFA, to really going through the process of discovering exactly who I am as an artist now, because I am never going to be held back by educational values and syllabi and standards anymore. This is it really as an artist in an MFA, or an artist who doesn't do an MFA after college. This is it. I'm me now. I'm an artist, Mom. I'm an artist that is not getting an art education anymore, really. Like, I don't know how to better articulate it. Let me just, like, because an MFA is based on you creating with guidance from people who can help you curate your artistic path but aren't giving you work to do. I'm my own boss with my art in my MFA. My teachers that I meet, one of them every week, are there to help guide me, give me inspiration, and tell me what I'm doing right and what might help me to push myself to where I want to be. Give me guidance. It's basically like really expensive coaching that gives you a certificate at the end, basically. But I want to teach art. I want to have the ability to teach art and help people to explore their own creativity. But how am I going to teach art if I can't figure out who I am as a creative and actually kind of embrace my ability to see things from my mind's eye as opposed to perfectly documenting the world, as somebody who isn't a realism artist and never wants to be and doesn't plan to be ever. And so the next few years of my life are going to be spent on me really finding myself as an artist, creating the work that I love, so that I can better teach people how to be the best possible artist that they can be. Not on a technical level per se, but I want to help people to explore their creativity. And if I can give people technical skills, not give them, like, bestow upon them, help people, like, curate technical skills, that's excellent, right? That's a part of being an art teacher. But more of art education is based on guiding people to see the world in a way that allows them to be a better creative, to understand the basic principles that they need to apply to then hone their own skills. You know, telling somebody how to draw does not give them the ability to draw. It is something that you have to do yourself, right? I can't just watch a YouTube video and become an excellent painter. I have to practice that. And that's what I like so much about art education, but hate so much about art education all the same. Because I've had a lot of teachers whom haven't had the ability to properly guide somebody in honing their own personal creative pursuit and having the leniency and understanding of allowing people to have the space to explore themselves. Just like I've had some teachers who have been absolutely divine in helping people to curate their own artistic identity. And that comes down a lot to kind of what type of school you went to. I found that a lot of my art teachers who went to bougie and expensive art schools really get stuck in their head about how to be a real artist and what real artists do and what real art education looks like. And I find that a lot of my teachers who went to kind of middle of nowhere kind of colleges to get their MFAs have a more diverse and kind of loving perspective on how they want to approach people discovering themselves as an artist. And that's a large part of why I picked the college I'm going to. going to, I'm a virtual student, was based on kind of price affordability, mostly, and the fact that it has a virtual MFA so I could stay home. I don't have to worry about my health. But it's also a college that's kind of, I don't want to say middle of nowhere, that's kind of how they describe it, but it's in kind of a more community, rural, kind of northern Vermont area. I literally live in a different time zone than my college, but people are very down to earth and loving there. They're very naturally inclined. They're very explorative and accepting, and that's the type of stuff that I want in my college. I want a college that doesn't have a right or wrong way to become an artist, because I don't want to hold that philosophy in my real life. And I don't want to bestow that idea upon anybody either. I hope I'm making it clear in all the times where I say for me and personally, and I think this has the potential to help other artists, but I make it clear that that is not the only way. I hope I'm demonstrating that I don't believe that there is one true way to become more creative or imaginative, right? This isn't going to cure struggles with imagination and creativity, but this is what I'm doing personally to try and unlock my own through what I know is my own personal shortcomings artistically. So I hope that I'm concise in that kind of presentation of information, and I'm not pushing something that's making people feel like they have to do this. It feels kind of awkward to say, but sometimes I wish I was still a self-taught artist. I love the teachers I've met. I love the advice that I've gotten. And I do genuinely think I wouldn't have progressed as fast as I have if I didn't have the structure of some of my education in terms of my teachers who were critiquing my work and helping me curate my kind of artistic identity in the beginning and pointing out and helping me figure out how to critique my own work. I don't think the syllabus kind of structure and homework per se really helps that much. It's the greatest value that I've got that I believe art courses offer is really the personalized critique of the work that you produce, and that people being able to identify and having a structured environment where they're looking at your work and saying, this could be a major step towards improvement. Try to think about this in the future. I notice you have this consistent issue. You might want to work on resolving it. That for me is, well, it was elongated limbs and figure drawing. It's my style, elongated limbs. I didn't take figure drawing until after I had developed my own art style. It's not really my art style anymore. They're not the same to be clear, but I had one at the time, and I had been developing it for a while. Developing it, an art styles I believe come naturally, and that's my opinion. But I sometimes still wish I was self-taught, because I feel like it had more room for me to feel purely free as an artist, and that the kind of structured system that our education has had has kind of slowed down my ability to actually self-teach, which is basically the most important thing you can learn as an artist, is the ability to teach yourself. Classes are not going to teach you how to be an artist, and they're not going to do a great job of teaching you how to do a thing as much as you taking the time to teach yourself will. And this all feels really weird to say, but I feel like art educators in higher education should be more of professional critiquers, like art critics, but bougie basically, and help people kind of find themselves. I don't think that they teach skills all that well. Maybe that's my personal experience. I hope to be able to help people learn skills more effectively and be able to give techniques that are based and curated to the student and to the individual more, through getting to know them and things of that nature. But for me, I never really felt like the techniques that were proposed to me, the things that I should work on kind of trying to get better at, were never really taking into account who I was, what my goals were, and most importantly, my health and my abilities as somebody with an illness. And so this all kind of a weird way of saying, I feel like to an extent getting a degree kind of hindered my self-teaching capabilities that I really valued and prided myself on when I was a self-taught artist. And I intend to basically, as much as you can, really, go back to being a self taught artist after my MFA and go back to continuing to teach myself and stepping away from the higher education realm. I love art courses made by real artists that are, genuine in their field. I'm really hoping to one day get to use Skillshare. I'm saving my money now for like serious adulty things like a mortgage I plan to have in a couple of years, but I'm hoping once my life settles down after that to go and do courses on Skillshare and really start to learn from my community more than I have been recently. And in the meantime, I want to continue to use YouTube because it's really one of the greatest locations on the internet to learn something new. I want to continue using this to further my education, and I really am relying on YouTube more than anything in my MFA as I try to kind of be a self-taught artist. And, self-taught. I hope I'm articulating myself well, but continuing to teach myself new things and kind of step away from my reliance on teachers that I've had throughout my undergrad now. And a part of that is going back to my favorite book series for teaching myself to draw. It has, to date, been one of my absolute greatest inspirations as an art book series, and that is the Sketching from the Imagination series. It has a load of books from my favorites were the character design one, and it was like dark and spooky dark arts. I think it was called Dark Arts, but that book series has always been one of my greatest inspirations of the type of artist I want to be. And the type of work I want people to see and really identify myself from and enjoy from me. Because it's weird to say, but a lot of the artists that I love, I look at their sketchbooks and I look at their goofy doodle sketches and thumbnails and I see genuine skill in them. And it feels weird to say, but somehow, artists who have really honed their craft and really have found their identity as an artist can draw a goofy little thumbnail with horrible proportions and still convey so much emotion and attitude and information about the scene that they want to convey. And I want to be able to do that. My dream is to be an artist where people can look at my worst sketches in my sketchbook and still identify me in them. And still see my sketch and be like, I know this artist and I love their work. And that's something that I really hope to achieve eventually. And how am I going to do that if I don't push myself to improve? And I'm hoping that by doing exercises that get me out of my head and help me to relocate my personal style, I'm going to have that come a bit more naturally to me. And finding your personal style is this weird kind of difficult and controversial thing to try and approach because an art style comes naturally, but I don't think that you can't go out of your way to try and do things that will help it come to you, to help find it sooner. And that does not come from intentionally trying to make work in a particular style that much. I think it comes from practicing and letting your mind kind of flow. Letting your kind of intuitive understanding of art develop as you do things more naturally and fluidly. And the more you draw, the more your style will come to you. One technique that I've been wanting to try myself as somebody who has an art style, I do think my art style is changing, for the record. I should be clear about that. I don't think that art styles are stagnant at all. And especially for people my age, right? Artists my age, I don't believe that an art style is stagnant. And you can see that in a lot of artists, but I tend to prefer the example of music when it comes to talking about how an art style isn't stagnant. I feel like everybody has a band that they loved when they were younger, and then you listen to the new albums and you're like, I hate this. This is awful. This is garbage. This is not what I liked. And maybe that's because you've changed and you've become a new person, but if you still like the original music, what probably has happened is that the artists have grown up and they're different people now, and that their work is just fundamentally different. They have a new style. Their music is in a style that you just don't like anymore. And it's sad and it sucks. Like, there are artists whom I really wish they continued to make music in their old art style because I just loved it so much and I wish I could have more of it, right? But I can't shame a musician for becoming new people, right? And so, to be clear, I'm a very different person than I was when I was in Sketchbook 9, and I really felt like my art was finally going where I wanted it to go. And it's still doing that thing, but I think that something is boiling under the surface for me right now. I don't know what it is, but every time I get in these slumps where I feel like my art isn't working, usually I come out of it and my style's a little bit different. Now, my art style doesn't change drastically, but there's little things that just get altered, and I'm trying to figure out what that is. And the more exercises I do, I hope I'll figure out what that tiny difference is that is making my work feel a little blocked at the moment. You know, like a clogged hose or something. Put in some really nice analogy or euphemism that, like, articulates, like, the opening of a dam, but I'm optimistic that the more I work on getting out of my head, the more naturally that little thing that is going to be getting added to my art style will come, right? And I'm not sure what it is yet, and I'm not sure if I'll even realize when I find it. Maybe I'll come out of the slump in a week or two and I'll have not even noticed the difference, but it'll be there. Maybe it's the way I color, maybe it's the way I do my line art, maybe I'll hatch differently a little bit. Maybe all it is a change in the way I approach actually creating the work, like documenting the process. Or maybe that tiny change is going to be something as simple as the flow and order I do my work in. Everything that you do as an artist that makes making art feel good to you is a component of who you are and part of your kind of artistic identity. And that's a part of why I feel like I don't really mind when people have very similar art styles, and I don't really think about it much because, frankly, there are so many of us. Our art styles are always going to have similarities and maybe really strong resemblances to other artists, and what's the big deal, because you definitely don't create the exact same way. Also, if you can hear the rainstorm, I can't make the sky stop, and I can't edit out the rain. I've tried. But you definitely don't create the same way. And so I don't really feel like it's really that big of a deal when artists have similar art styles. What comes naturally to you comes naturally to you. And that's who you are, and how you do it is just going to be part of your identity as an artist. And that's something that I find really beautiful, in particular about Art YouTube. And I do want to talk about Art YouTube eventually on like a more serious topic, and kind of just my feelings about it as somebody who loves it so much but has seen a couple of controversies recently that have really made me want to talk about the concept of art education on YouTube and art in general on YouTube particularly. Especially because I feel like this is one of our biggest hubs as artists to find people who want to also create. And then the second best place might be Tumblr, unfortunately. And as someone with a Tumblr, I can assure you, it is not a great place. But I feel like I would like to talk about what it's like to have a home here artistically one day. But that's kind of an aside, and I'm really trying to be good for once in my videos and actually kind of maintain a consistent theme. Let me know if you prefer my ramblings where I go off on tangents completely unrelated. I'm trying to be good though, guys, I swear. But needless to say, I'm rather optimistic that very soon, whatever the small change is that's making me feel a little bit off is going to just come out naturally, and it's going to be through doing exercises and just kind of pushing myself to explore new things until I figure it out, right? And this system hasn't failed me yet. And I can't say it's going to work for everybody, but I mean, it's worked for me, and that's why I'm doing it, right? If this wasn't something that worked, I'd probably be trying to get out of this weird situation by taking a step away from art for a couple of weeks just to let myself settle and then come back to it and see maybe if that fixes the problem. But I know that as a person, I need to work through my artistic struggles and do that by creating more work. Taking a break from art doesn't make me feel better. I'm not the type of artist whom can step away from art and come back better. I'm not the type of artist who generally experiences artistic burnout, and it's largely because of, as I mentioned earlier in the video, my inclination towards multiple mediums and multiple artistic practices, challenges, and things like that. I don't really experience burnout because I have such a variety. And I'm very fortunate as an artist to have such a mixed media and multidisciplinary approach that grants me this, because it really is important for me to keep creating. I'm not somebody who can let their mind kind of settle down and is relieved by a lack of creative outlet. The longer I go without creating, the more stressed I become. I'm one of those people who needs to do it to function. Even if it's something stupid like a really garbage drawing of an eyeball on a sticky note or in the margins of something important, something creative has to come out of me or I will spontaneously combust and the world will end, right? It's kind of one of those situations. So I'm feeling better now. I know I said it in my last video, but I'm feeling better now. And this kind of art journey, this art little process, really just felt like vomiting on a piece of paper and then feeling good. I don't know how to articulate that. That was kind of gross. But I don't know how to say that in a way that's not nasty now that I think about it. I feel relieved. It's like taking a headache medicine after having the headache of a lifetime, right? You just feel relieved that it's over or that you have any sort of temporary relief. I'm feeling great now, actually. And I don't really know how much an update on me as an artist really actually is important on this video or this channel, but I'm feeling better now, guys. And I hope that I haven't been too much of a drab in my videos recently because of this weird art challenge that I've been dealing with where I just feel like I'm not doing it, right? I'm not being a good artist, really. It is basically how I was feeling before, and I'm out of the art block, but I'm not completely out of the feeling of failure as an artist. But I'm getting there slowly, and I'm really starting to feel at home again, and it's feeling great, guys. I'm really excited to create new and better work. My better work will not look like anything on this paper, probably, because I ended up with just a bunch of dorky little guys, but I am excited, and I feel like it's going to be really good again soon. And I'm really grateful for everybody who has stuck with me throughout this kind of process as well. But I'm quite certain that I have talked beyond long enough, and I really should set you all free to enjoy your creative pursuits beyond my little corner of the internet. And so, with all of this being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video and my discussions, and I hope you enjoyed me being consistent for once in my life and actually staying on topic. I appreciate you sitting all the way through to the end of this video. If you have anything you want to say about the process, what you created along the way, I would love to hear it in the comments down below. I really appreciate it. Tag me on social media if you want to. Share it in private messages if you're feeling shy about sharing it with the terrifying, scary, mean internet. And with all of this being said, if you would like to see more content from me, please subscribe. I post videos every Saturday, and I love having people here in my corner. Additionally, like the video if you like it, dislike if you dislike it, share if you feel like sharing with anybody, save it to a playlist to watch later when you have a creative slump somewhere in the distant future and you're like, wow, I remember listening to that one woman for an hour straight talk about shapes and art education and the complexities of having an artistic identity. I would love to rewatch that. Because that's what I do with the videos I watch. I put them in a playlist to watch 10 times over or more. But I said like, I said dislike, I said subscribe, I said share. So I think that that is all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are, and bye bye. I think that we've gotten to a point of me rambling about these kind of more philosophical, broader, weird art topics. I don't know if they're philosophical. I'm also sick at the moment, by the way. I should have mentioned that earlier. I'm very sick. I don't feel great. But I think it's finally time to kind of discuss the actual kind of approach that I started getting into now that we're almost done, because it's actually on the one that's visibly being shown right now that I started to actually find my flow and understand how I would approach this in the future. So it took a while. It took almost the whole page for me to find a flow in this kind of process and start to identify like patterns and how I started to take on the information. But I find that I'm always attracted to circles. That's a very consistent theme in my art. I like to put circles. I put them to help like define face shapes and things like that. I put them on shoulders. I like a good curve in my work. And so at the beginning, you probably noticed that I was focused really on the blocky basic outline of the shape. And I slowly started to start I slowly started to identify more circular shapes and start to kind of draw in curves to create that more organic feeling that I'm a fan of and I kind of am accustomed to artistically. And by slowly kind of integrating the curves, I ended up creating my better ones by free flowing and drawing circles randomly around it to kind of flow with the overall shape that was being produced. And by being able to break beyond the actual outline and think, how would this work as a unit beyond the singular silhouette that I'm looking at, I was starting to better identify my own kind of flow state. And that flow state came from an initial outline. The initial basic outline I tried to keep light, not have any particularly darkened areas, because I also tried not to think super hard about realistic shading and having a light source. I really wanted only the dark parts to be things that might be on a different level, but not necessarily which one is on the different level. Generally, the shaded parts look like they're on a back end, but overall, I just wanted shading and hatching to be a way of indicating that these things were separate and not actually an indication of a genuine light source in the environment that you could view and rely upon, right? And so, with that, I started trying to carve out shapes based on the flow of the marker streaks. And the marker streaks generally had different layers because I wasn't going in one flat, singular swipe of my marker across the paper. And doing that was intentional for me when I was doing it. I was trying to have multiple layers because I knew that it would support me in getting through this exercise to have darker bits of marker to create outlines. I wasn't intentional with where I put them, but I did try to have multiple layers when going down and scribbling over the paper for this exact reason. And most of those, no matter how blocky they were, I ended up defining by some sort of ovular, circular, more organic shape. And I started trying to create arches and tubings and circles to like for great patterns to kind of find my own kind of identity in the piece. I felt like it wasn't me when it was mostly relying on rectangles. And I don't know if that's because I'm just obsessed with circles artistically and I can't survive without them, or if I genuinely just don't think in kind of square, rough edge shapes as much as I probably should. But the further I went along, the more I started to incorporate circles and curvatures and then darkening those outlines where they were sharp originally and softening them out by darkening them up. I found that I was starting to get a better idea of how I was thinking about things within the space in relation to each other, and better understanding kind of how I wanted people to read the information. So I hope that when we get to the end of the video and you could see the final see the final page with everything except for the weird sack at the bottom. The sack was just, I don't know what happened. It's a little bag of magic pixie dust or something, I don't know. And I did kind of end up with a slime monster next to it. I didn't know what to do with it. Well, I did know, but I wanted it to be a slime monster. I saw a slime monster, I made a slime monster. That was it. That's where the brain went. I didn't think beyond that. But I hope when we get to the final page that you can kind of identify, aside from the bottom row of weird, goofy, tiny things, that I was genuinely starting to get better, like having more visual intrigue the further we went through. I believe it's 1 through 9 are the good ones, but I'm optimistic that it's something you can actually identify as a steady improvement, as I got into the flow and I was getting increasingly better at actually processing this information, which is something I'm super, super excited about and very optimistic that I'm doing good. I'm really happy with this page. I don't know how to articulate it any other way. Like, as stupid and simple as it is, I just feel like I created a really nice looking sheet of paper, I guess. But I'm quite certain that I have talked beyond long enough, and I really should set you all free to enjoy your creative pursuits beyond my little corner of the internet. And so, with all of this being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video and my discussions, and I hope you enjoyed me being consistent for once in my life and actually staying on topic. I appreciate you sitting all the way through to the end of this video. If you have anything you want to say about the process, what you created along the way, I would love to hear it in the comments down below. I really appreciate it. Tag me on social media if you want to. Share it in private messages if you're feeling shy about sharing it with the terrifying, scary, scary, mean internet. And with all of this being said, if you would like to see more content from me, please subscribe. I post videos every Saturday, and I love having people here in my corner. Additionally, like the video if you like it, dislike if you dislike it, share if you feel like sharing with anybody, save it to a playlist to watch later when you have a creative slump somewhere in the distant future and you're like, wow, I remember listening to that one woman for an hour straight talk about shapes and art education and the complexities of having an artistic identity. I would love to rewatch that. Because that's what I do with the videos I watch. I put them in a playlist to watch 10 times over or more. But I said like, I said dislike, I said subscribe, I said share. So I think that is all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And bye-bye.